Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Accelerating AI podcast. I'm with my colleagues Andy and Matthew. Really, did anyone notice that the EU AI Act silently switched on this week?
Honestly, Lionel, it completely passed us by. And I can say, hand on heart, I have not had a single conversation with any SME where this has come up. And been digging into it the last couple of days, and it's quite profound what changes are actually expected. The businesses are simply not even aware of, let alone implementing. The only parallel I can really draw is, GDPR when that first sort of came out and into force, and the almost hysteria around it in businesses for a good 6, 12, 18 months. I couldn't go to a single meeting with a client where GDPR, privacy policies, cookie policies didn't come up, right? And it feels like that's what should be happening with this EU AI Act. 2nd of August was the enforcement of the transparency
Element of it, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because, we being in this space are swept away with all of the headlines of, the controversies and the debate and the amazing releases of tools, yesterday, a virus that AI has created, these things are just taking the headlines. But in the meanwhile, we've got this huge AI act that's been rolled out and actually activated this week. And to be quite honest, it's been sort of in the background for us and for, I guess, in our conversations as well. We haven't forgotten about it, but we have quite literally, it's activated now. And so there is a step change in seriousness when we actually realize what this means for the work that we all do here in this group and in our individual businesses, but also for all of the businesses, whether you're an SME or an enterprise, and the impact this actually has. And it is, like Matt, you're saying that the scale and size of something thinking about, on in line with GDPR, reading up on kind of the fines at place. But, I think we'll talk a little bit more about, what it means for SMEs in particular. This is a can of worms, I think, for everybody that'll be listening.
Lionel, from your perspective, what is it? What's actually changed over the last week?
Well, unbeknownst to us, or to most people, the EU have been beavering away at this AI Act since about 2022. So it's been a long time in the making. And from what I read, it is probably the first and most significant AI guideline or rule book that's come into play globally. And I'm really happy for it, if I'm brutally honest. I'm happy for it because it's starting to set out boundaries. It's starting to set out how business should behave, how businesses should adopt AI. It also goes on to talk about AI literacy, what we should be talking to our colleagues, the people that work for us, our employees. So it's very encompassing in that way. And it's also one of the first times that we have a very meaningful bit of legislation that takes into consideration small business. We talk about AI for small businesses, small, medium enterprises. And for the first time, there are concessions for businesses that are under 750 people and turning over less than, I think, 50 million euros. And that's significant because it's now setting out that government have a role to play in how small businesses tackle AI. Things like making regulatory sandboxes available, for instance, helping small business communicate better on what that AI landscape needs to look like. So providing strategic advice so that small business owners aren't sit there scratching their heads going, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to start. So it's very positive that it's thought out. So the question is if you're a 10-person small business, for the first time you have a bit of regulation that's really giving you really good guidelines. How do you tackle this? How do you use it? And things like ensuring that when your customer interacts with your chatbot, that your customer knows they're interacting with the chatbot, right? That's really helpful. You pick up and your query on the telephone's being handled by an AI. You're announcing the fact that, you're dealing with an AI. And I think that's really transformative, and I think that's really amazing. But how many small businesses now know that if they're generating content using AI, they need to disclose that, right?
It just
All
I
the
wanna
LinkedIn articles, all the
yeah.
blog posts. Yeah.
Just want to clarify one thing. You mentioned the 50 million euro figure. It's actually 150 million euros.
150. Okay.
But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think your LinkedIn. You just mentioned LinkedIn. I think it's a really good example of. We were having a bit of a discussion. We do a lot of work on LinkedIn. We do ads on LinkedIn. We have clients that really rely on LinkedIn as a channel, a marketing channel. But we were having discussion around LinkedIn in particular and feeling like it's basically bots talking to bots at this point. It's a lot of AI slop. And I don't know whether you guys noticed, but there's a feature that LinkedIn have rolled out where you can actually flag content as being this looks like AI slop now. That's a relatively recent feature. And I think that sort of approach of content needing to be tagged as being generated by AI, I think is super important because we're in a world now where, bad actors and rogue states can really shake up social media platforms and influence society in a way that is dangerous. And content that can be generated en masse, pumped out to the masses with just false information, not fact checked, and pushing an agenda as well. I think these are all things that society needs to be really aware of, and regulation is a step on the road to avoiding
Keeping that in check, right?
keeping it in check. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And one other thing I just wanted to mention, obviously, is the EU AI Act. Now, there may be people listening to this going, well, I'm in the UK. I run a UK SME. What's it to me? We're not in the EU anymore. And I totally understand that thinking. However, the Act does apply globally in the sense of if you take your example of a chatbot, Lionel, if you have a website that is accessible within the EU and you have a chatbot running on your website and you do not make it clear that that is an AI powered chatbot, you are falling foul of this regulation. And I think it's only a matter of time before the UK adopt
Yes.
the same regulation under the UK law or a very similar looking sounding set of regulations anyway. So I think it's good practice, regardless of whether you think this affects you or not, to really look at these regulations that are coming in, understand why in the first place that they're doing this and what the purpose of it is, and start making steps towards being compliant with it. I think that, that is the message I think we just need to make sure we get out, because there is this, I mean, I said it at the start, it's kind of passed me by a little bit in the sense of I was aware of it, but because it's got EU in the title, I've not really worried about it too much. But actually, when you dig into it, this is something that UK businesses need to be looking at very, very closely.
Yeah, I think there's also it's interesting because there's lots of, it's inevitable that it's going to be in our hands now, and it's here to stay. We're using it more and more in different tools, in different applications. Some are internal using tools, some are external using tools. And so the risk is different, right? And the risk to expose that externally has far more, there is a higher risk in, and issues that could happen or become a problem than internal. But even with internal use cases, using AI could have negative effects. And I think this is why this regulation is here to stay. We talked last week about the amazing power of open source models and agentic AI decision making and AI just doing stuff itself, and the art of the possible. Well, AI EU Act hopes to, I think, not just like because it's boring regulation and it feels kind of like friction, but the idea is it's to manage that risk, right? Is to manage those guardrails that we want to put in place. It's to keep people safe from the potential problems that this automated autonomous agents could decide for us, especially in the context of military or healthcare, right? Like those are areas where I think AI EU Act would have definitely a part to play and an important role to play in enforcing that governance. But I think for a small business that may not be in there, there's also areas, and just trying to kind of bring out to life what other areas, and maybe you guys can add to that. I think in the context of, okay, Copilot, maybe for just writing a document, pretty low risk, right? But you're generating a document with AI, But the use of where that's being presented in a legal sense, maybe it's a legal document, there's clear risks in that. I think other areas I was reading up on was like, what are you using it in recruitment? Maybe scanning CVs, right, to make hiring decisions.
I think that's
that's
one
a risk there as well.
Andy, that's one that I think will speak to a lot of people who watch this, right? Yeah, on the subject of recruitment, Andy, just I wanted to interject there because I think that's something that many people who are watching and listening can identify with, either on one side of the table or the other, right? They're either been looking for a job or have uh, applied for jobs in recent years, or they've been on the hiring side, right? And they're and I think that's something that I just want to just think about the ethics side of it. Put yourself in the shoes of a graduate coming out of university at the moment. They're trying to get their first job on the career ladder. It's hard out there at the moment for young people to get jobs. But do you think it smacks a little bit knowing that potentially when you're applying for a job, it's not even a human being making the decision as to whether you get the interview? And I think we've had things like this in place for a long time, algorithms and assessments and tests and things, but it's something that
here's the but here's the contradictory bit, and I understand where you're going with it, but the problem we have is we have a whole bunch of people using AI to write their resumes and their CVs.
Yeah.
Now you have a whole bunch of AIs reading AI written CVs.
I did it. Yeah.
Right? How do you cut through that? I mean, the EU AI Act has actually given a bit of a reprieve on the more sensitive parts, right? So the more sensitive parts, like the high-risk systems, like hiring tools, for instance, and biometrics, guidance around that's been pushed back to the end of next year for that, which means that those tools are still going to be in use for a little while before the safeguards are put into place, right? But I just wonder how efficient AI hiring tools will be when they're looking at AI constructed CVs.
Yeah.
How do you cut through that, and how do you find out is this the person I want to employ, right?
I worry about bias as well, and the hiring human being using that tool. How much of an understanding do they have as to how that AI is forming the decision as to whether to proceed with a particular candidate or not?
Yeah.
And then you get into, I'm seeing examples of AI interviews as well, where they're effectively doing an interview to an AI with no human involved. And again, that becomes part of the hiring process. And then I see people on the flip side attending interviews with an AI script transcriber, basically giving them what to say. And where do you go with that? How do you pick through that? And in the UK, this also comes at a time when working rights have been altered and substantially improved. And I don't want to get too much into the political debate around that, but that's having an impact on businesses making decisions to hire anyway. So the impact is that making a bad hire is actually really risky for small businesses in particular at the moment. And you combine that with, and then you start think you can see the attraction as to why an SME would want to use this technology in the first place. But I don't know, on a human level, I just don't. It's the one thing where I want to be judged on my own merits by another human being, not a robot, right? And it's one of those that I think people will have a feeling about, right?
Yeah.
An emotional inner feeling about being judged by a robot.
Yeah, I think the recruitment process is going to probably flip on its head pretty soon, as they're already starting to feel the effects of, decision making. It is decision making because CVs are being written and then being decided upon by AI and two systems, right? One is creating the document, the other one is reading the document. And those automated decisioning and filtering is just causing a problem. I think recruiters are already having that. I've seen and heard that conversation and that dialogue. So I think something's going to be shifting quite dramatically in that space. But I think just coming back to the EU Act, there's a lot of things there in that I think we can talk about, which might be more applicable. Why should they care? I think we've just talked about that. But like, what can a business do now? What should they be thinking about today? If they were looking to, stay compliant or within the guardrails of this new law that's been put forward.
I just want to frame something that plays quite nicely into the kind of the question you're asking. So Intuit 2026 AI Impact Report, okay, it found that 77% of small businesses were using AI daily, every single day. And more alarmingly, 49%, nearly half of all those employees used unapproved AI tools. Okay. So we've now got the biggest mass adoption of AI sitting in businesses, from really small things like just using ChatGPT to do a bit of research. But also there's a whole load of free tools that are being made available, for which small businesses are exchanging their data into tools that have very, very weak controls, extremely weak controls. So I think the AI Act has actually come in at a very, very opportune time, because small businesses need to wake up and take control of what's happening with the use of AI within that business, within their business. Right.
So do you think,
How
Lionel,
many of them actually have an AI policy? How many small
Yeah.
businesses have an AI policy? Nobody. But they're using it. So, the adoption of AI is taking place faster than we're writing rules for it.
Do you think there's going to be we're going to have like a ban list, like a do not, the URL's not even accessible in companies? What do you guys think about that?
We do that already. We do that already. If a company mandates they will only use Copilot, or they mandate they will only use Claude, we have applications that stop them from using other AI tools, shadow AI.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be.
But with the proliferation of AI tools, like literally so many, right? So many chatbots, so many versions of it, Perplexity, right? Google Gemini, those are the big, big players, but there's tons of, mid-market, smaller players of AI chatbots. So how do we make controls around those in our policies?
You can't mitigate for every circumstance, but you can educate. And I think a lot of this is about educating the people in your organization on how to be safe with AI, right? There are a lot of dodgy things available on the internet, but you don't find your employees searching them willy-nilly. Why? Because you've put policies in place and you've educated them to say, don't do these dodgy things, these things that could bring potential harm to the business. And you know what? Most people, 99% of people, abide by it. Right.
And that's why you have your policies, right? And that's why you have, AI needs to be baked into your employee handbook. It needs to be something that's talked about, trained, regular training is done in the same way that we do training on cybersecurity and we do training on phishing and scams and that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Generally in business these days, I think it comes hand in hand with that. And I think you're totally right, Lionel. I think you can either go down the route of we're just going to police the hell out of our IT infrastructure, or you focus on education. And I think the more impactful thing is going to be explaining to staff what those risks are, why they exist, and what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I think that's the right approach. Andy, you asked the question of and I think it's just a good broad question actually. If you're an SME listening to this podcast right now or watching this podcast, what's the one thing that they need to go and do tomorrow, you guys think?
So I think from my perspective, like as a business leader, executive, or owner of the company that you're if you're listening to this, I think there's one simple assessment that you could do, which is just be aware of the technology stack that you have today, and quite simply put, do a very basic assessment of here's product 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are deemed as having AI components that you're using. So for example, you might be using, I don't know, ChatGPT, Copilot, Canva, AI note taker, whatever those are, right? List them down. I think then just try to assess the exposure, whether it's an internal product or external product. If it is external product, okay, then that creates more risk, because you are potentially giving it to more users than just in the confines of your organization. And then I think what could be done is thereafter, because you've got mapped out basically and done almost like a very high level risk assessment, you can then start pinpointing where you are exposed more or less in line with AI's the EU Act that we will just be discussing. That kind of basic risk assessment in a plain spreadsheet is probably good enough for, just going over, in the 3 minutes that I've got to describe this, what could be a stepping stone forward to have some sort of due diligence around the products that you have. That's my 60-second action.
I think it's doing a full audit of what's going on with AI in your business, right? What tools you're using, and just being aware first and foremost of what you've got. and what your team are using as well, not necessarily just what you as an organization provide, but ask the team what other tools you're using, because if they've got a Google account, they've got access to Gemini. If they've got, they can sign up for a free ChatGPT license, and you would never know that they're using those tools. So it's really important to, I think, engage the workforce in that audit, that risk assessment, not just do it from your ivory tower as the business owner and what you think everybody's using, because
Exactly.
it might surprise you.
And you're absolutely right. And that leads on to having a little policy, even if it's just one page. Have a policy that says, these are the tools that we use. These tools are mandated by the company. They're approved by the company. Use those tools. And something that goes on to say, provide guidelines in that policy on the safe use. Okay. It doesn't have to be wide ranging. It doesn't have to be, war and peace. A one pager that says, use these tools because we know they're good. Okay. Because a lot of people go and use some type of open weight application from somewhere and part with company data. We don't want that. We want tools we can trust, that are vetted, and some safety around how we use it. And crucially, what data we do use, right? We don't want to be putting GDPR sensitive data that's got people's names and addresses and telephone numbers into a tool to manipulate something for us when that could be a risk. Right.
I totally agree with that. I think what I'd just tag on the end of that is we're obviously in a world that's rapidly changing. New tools are coming to the market all the time. So there has to be within that policy a framework for how new tools can be tested and adopted as well, brought into the business and evaluated. And where I've seen that work really, really well is you have, an A team of users. That could be one person in a small organization, or it could be a small team of 4 or 5 that are your experimental team, right? They'll go out and try new tools and they'll test new tools. And anybody else in the business can say, I've come across this tool. Can we put this on the list to have that team look at it? The reason why, if you keep that team small and focus, they can be the innovators behind it. And you've got to pick the right people here. You've got to pick people who are really engaged, really interested, really switched on, really focused on the positives around what AI can bring to the business. But that's what I've seen working and playing out in other SMEs. So it's a way of approaching that having a policy and having a set of defined tools, but without stifling innovation and being able to progress and move forward as well.
We call them AI champions.
That's it. Yeah, that's the phrase I've heard as well.
Absolutely. Have an AI champion or a bunch of them that want to use the tools, but also have the capability of assessing whether a tool's valuable and whether it's safe. Right. Absolutely.
I'll add my thing to go and do tomorrow then to that list, and I'm going to kind of go down a slightly different vein.
On a Saturday.
This AI visibility piece that's coming on the transparency rules that came in on the 2nd of August. So since our last podcast, and that's how recent it is. A lot of that is around marking content, marking features, functions on public-facing websites and applications where AI is somehow involved in the generation of content. And I think, the examples we've given, a lot of them are internal use cases. I would have a look at your external, what you're putting out into the world, and how much of that is actually being tagged as being AI generated. So if you're generating imagery, it within this act, it should be tagged as being AI generated. If you're generating blogs and putting them up on your website, for example, you might be putting advice pieces out there that people are reading and taking as factually correct, and you could be liable, right? If you're not tagging that content as being AI generated. So I think that's something that businesses need to, and they can start looking at now. Most businesses I speak to are doing some form of content generation with AI. They're writing blogs with it. They're putting social media content out there with it. And you can have the debate around whether that's a good thing, bad thing. That's kind of irrelevant. The fact is they're doing it. They're putting this content out there, and that's an easy fix. That's something that you can put in place as a process within your business, that nothing goes out that's AI generated unless it's being tagged as being AI generated or AI assisted content. I think that's just a really simple thing that businesses can do today that isn't massively technical or complicated to implement, but is in the spirit of this act.
Here's a thought I've been thinking about as we've been just talking about this. We're moving into a world which is probably already there, that all the content we read, whether it's on social media and a blog or, Instagram, TikTok, wherever, right? A lot of these are created, whether it's video or text, images, like assisted with AI. So in a world where we're like, have assistance of AI in almost 80-90% of our content, right? How relevant is a tag really in the future if majority of the things that we're doing is assisted, right? Or augmented? Frankly, from my side, right? Like a lot of the work that I'm doing in the planning and the building and the content creation, whether it's on LinkedIn or elsewhere, of course I'm using AI to help formulate my content. And everybody else I can see on LinkedIn, right, is almost doing the same thing. But I can see those that are just copying, pasting slop versus like stuff that is, thoughtfully written and curated and assisted. And still we have to tag and say, hey guys, this was created with AI. So we're just going to have this label stuck where appropriate to stay in the compliance. And then we're all numb to this silly label. And we're like, how does it become then useful in a world where, majority of our content will be augmented? It's a hard thing to come to terms with, but like
it is. And I think you're right, Andy. I think that if it gets to a point where every single piece of content that goes out the door has to have a tag on it that says this is AI generated, and everybody's doing that, you are right. It's a bit like disclaimers and email signatures. Nobody reads them, but we've all got one, right?
You just ignore them.
You just become numb to them, right? And I think that okay, that's a plaster over the wound, and that's technically if you're reading the guidance, that's what you should be doing. Okay, whether it happens in practice or whether it's actually useful in the long run, that remains to be seen. But I do think that if we're talking about social media in particular, I think there has to be emphasis on those platforms to flag content that is, and they are moving towards that. You're starting to see it in social media feeds that content is being flagged as being potentially AI drafted. And we've talked before about some of the frontier firms coming together and agreeing on a way of tagging video and imagery content with invisible watermarks so they can be detected as being AI generated or AI enhanced. And I think that these are all good steps in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, the spirit of the regulation is that the onus is on the business to tag the content. I don't know if that's right or workable long term, but right now that is technically what should be being done.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. Dario Amodei, the guy that heads up Claude, Anthropic, got together along with guys like Elon Musk and sort of got to government trying to create a FINRA-style agency to try and monitor LLMs, for instance. I wonder whether there is any value in an organization like that having an input into what happens with the EU AI Act, or whether we end up having some global type rule book or book of conformity, because this is a global issue. And and in previous conversations we've talked about Chinese open weights and the way they view and the way their view of AI should be. And then we've got the West's and America's view of the way AI should be. I think there is generally a need for a global type rule book, compliance book of how we should be behaving, how humanity should be behaving really at that level. Because if we do these things in isolation, I just wonder how effective they are going to be. If the EU is doing their own thing and the US is doing their own thing and the UK and China's doing their own thing and Russia's doing their own thing, how does it lead to global good?
Yeah, and something like that would really only happen if we're at they're all at the table, right? And there is an AI race, as it's coined, right? The race to AGI, the race to building and solving some of the world's hardest problems, which we're already doing right now.
Yeah.
It's a hard one to mandate across the globe when there's so much polarization of the politicians in today's world. So I should hope so. There's a 10 commandments kind of equivalent to AI in the world.
Great, wouldn't it? Yeah.
That that allows us to have some basic governance and frame around ethics and safe use that we can all
we should just bring back a global institution of Asimov's rule. Just get done with it, right? Maybe that's what we need. I don't know. That sounds like a good idea right now. Yeah. I'm just trying to think what else made the news. I mean, there's this thing that's coming up. I'm starting to hear recently about agents and liability. There's been quite a bit of chatter around, us as a business builds an application that uses AI for a customer. The application gets it wrong. The AI gets it wrong. Where does the liability sit?
Mm.
Does it sit with us as a person who's built a tool? Does it sit with the vendor of the LLM, right?
Yeah, I've heard of AI insurance.
Yeah. How does it affect your insurance? So that's a really interesting thing that's coming to a head now, because, there's so many AI firms now that are knocking out agents that do purpose-driven work. And we're starting to see things like, I don't know, I mean, I spend a lot of my life in the Claude arena. And every now and again, Claude kind of gets to the point where it says, if I'm at 11 o'clock at night doing something, goes, I think you've had enough for today. I think you should close. Claude's told me, I think you've had enough. You need to close up. And you're going to say, you tell it, don't be judgmental, and you keep plugging on, and it kind of digs its feet in. I've had it a couple of times now where it's kind of gone, I think you've played enough today, and I start to get the kickback. But I also wonder what instances where the AI genuinely starts to make a decision that's kind of almost an unwanted decision.
I think the liability question is something that keeps me awake at night a little bit, because we are, we've talked about it at length. We're building tools with AI at the moment, and we've unleashed the ability to code to everybody in our team, right? And left, right, and center for all the positive things that are coming out of it. Lots of really fantastic use cases, lots of creativity, lots of tools that, with somebody with a different mindset could just have that idea and just do it. These are all great, fantastic things. But then the liability that comes with that and is attached to that. Because if you give an employee the ability to write code, but actually they don't really know how to write code, they're just prompting an LLM to write the code for them. That means they don't have the ability to audit that LLM's work. That means they don't necessarily understand how it's working under that application, that piece of software, or even that website or widget or plugin or whatever it is they've built. And on the surface, on face value, it does the job. It does what they thought it was going to do. It looks the part. It does work the way they expected it to work. So they just deploy it and they just put it live. That application then actually has a glaring vulnerability in it and actually starts leaking personal data, or causes other systems to go offline, or fundamentally does something it wasn't intended to do. Who's liable? Because I think the way this currently works is the employee is liable. I think that they have used the tool to build the thing, right? And you talked about this last time, Lionel, in terms of we police the output, not necessarily the tools themselves. But that's something that I don't think is widely understood by the workforce when they're, you talked about shadow AI earlier. They're using their own tools that are not company sanctioned tools. And they do something with those tools. I mean, maybe they've connected it to work systems via MCPs, and they do something that damages that business. Are they personally liable for that risk? And it's a really important topic, and it's something that, when we talk about educating staff, I think we need to firstly understand that as business leaders ourselves, where that risk action liability actually sits. And if it is with the employee or the individual or the company or the organization or the LLM, we need to make sure that staff are aware of that.
Yeah. Hopefully the EU AI Act goes away to trying to help us address that. I think it will. I think as the act evolves, it'll encompass a little bit more, perhaps give us small businesses a bit bigger, a bit more in the way of direction and how to tackle some of these things. So, yeah.
Well,
I'm sure this won't be the first and last episode of the AI EU Act.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think, like all big regulation, right? There's no examples of it being applied yet. And as we start to see larger businesses being taken to task on practices and behaviors that perhaps aren't in line with the regulation, I think we're going to have more and more examples of where businesses are falling foul and learning from that. And I think the regulation itself will evolve every time there is a case or an investigation that comes from this. It is, as you say, Andy, it's the starting point really for this regulation, which will need to constantly evolve and adapt and change as the landscape changes.
It couldn't have come soon enough in my opinion. So I'm glad it's here.
The law firms will be very happy. They've got another revenue model, right? Another service to offer to us AI companies.
There you go. All right. I think it's a wrap, gentlemen.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think is it a good time to talk about the conference, guys, that we've got coming
Absolutely.
up? So we are now a matter of a couple of months away from the next conference, which is on the 13th of October. It's at Unity Place, so change of venue this time round. So capacity, I think, for up to 300 delegates, guys. Should be a nice step up in the event, the venue, the format is slightly different as well. We've got potentially more partners and more businesses involved. I don't know what do you guys want to build on that?
Yeah. So we've got an amazing group of partners. So, some of them that are confirmed: Microsoft, we have NatWest, we have the South Midlands Growth Hub, we have the Federation of Small Businesses, the University of Bedfordshire. That's just to name a few. There's several other really large AI and tech companies that we're about to also announce. So it should be a really exciting event. I really hope that people come and find value in it. This is going to be our 5th event, so it's not one that we've done. We're not doing this for the first time. We've had quite a good audience, a very engaged audience. So we just hope that folks that are listening are able to come, attend, participate, listen, and also lean in. And we're all learning, like we've always said. So yeah, I'm pretty excited.
And no event's ever the same because the technology is moving so fast. Every single conference is different. There's new things to talk about. There's new things to explore. So phenomenal amount of value to be had by attending.
Absolutely. And if that sounds like something you'd be interested in being involved in, coming along to, best way to keep up to date with what's going on, and importantly to get some tickets, which are free by the way, is to go to our website, which is acceleratingai.co.uk. And all of the information about the conference will be updated on that website over the next few weeks and in the lead up to the event. And there's a button on the header there where you can register to get a ticket for the event. We do expect to be pretty well subscribed, so grab your ticket now whilst you can, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.